Kol hakavod to everyone who participated in our service this morning and chanted beautifully and blessed us beautifully and caused blessings to come down into this congregation. There is a scene in one particular movie, the 1980s classic, The Princess Bride, that comes to my mind this morning. There is a wedding happening, and there is the officiant standing in front of the congregation in a bedazzled robe, a very large hat. He's some kind of a bishop, and he begins his charge, and he says, "Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today. Marriage, that blessed arrangement, that dream within a dream." But of course, the joke is all in the delivery, and the officiant has a particularly thick accent, and so it sounds a lot more like this. Marriage is what brings us together today. Marriage, that blessed arrangement, that dream within a dream. I joke, of course, but that is the sentiment that I cannot help but think of this Shabbat, Shabbat Nachamu, Shabbat Ve'et Hanan, and also, of course, the Shabbat which immediately follows Tu B'Av. The Shabbat, perhaps more than any other, is about marriage, and is about love, and is about romance, and the relationship between God and the people of Israel. Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, which fell just yesterday, is the ancient Mishnaic marking of romantic love, described by some, including our own Rabbi McCarroll, as Jewish Valentine's Day. It is actually a bit of an older observance that faded from practice for nearly 2,000 years and was resurrected in the early 20th century. In Mishnah Ta'anit, the rabbis are discussing and remembering the various offerings and fasts and holidays which occurred while the temple still stood in Jerusalem. Some of them have already faded from practice in their own day, while some, like Tisha B'Av, which is not to be confused with Tu B'Av, become codified in that moment and given new significance. And at the very end of the 4th chapter, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel makes a nostalgic statement, and you can almost hear the wistfulness in his voice. There were no days as joyous for the Jewish people as the 15th of Av and as Yom Kippur, as on them the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in borrowed white clothes so as to never embarrass one who did not own her own garments. And the daughters of Jerusalem would go out and they would dance in the vineyards. Which is to say that in the days when the temple stood, all of the young women would go out dressed in white, and the young men would follow behind them, and they would go down to the vineyard, and they would dance, and they would make the matches, the shidduchim, for the year. And when did they do this? Well, on 2 sacred days, apparently on Yom Kippur. As soon as the fast was over, they brought life and joy back into the world, and on Tu B'Av, a day set aside specifically for this ritual. It's a beautiful love scene, a matchmaking ritual, a vision of a pastoral Jerusalem. All of those young people, regardless of wealth or station, dressed in equal beauty, dancing happily as they dream of their romantic future. Tu B'Av is this token of romance, of first blush based on fantasy, fleeting first visions, special moments, joyous dancing. Who will be your match? Could your beshart be right here? You never know. So go down and dance, see and be seen. It's that same youthful idealism that anything is possible if you find the right person, that we actually hear in the first few verses of Fiddler on the Roof's famous, "Matchmaker, oh matchmaker." And of course, once Jerusalem is destroyed, even by the ancient days when Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is still recounting this story, the dancing has ended, and the ritual with it. And Tu B'Av is nothing more than a memory. It's one more thing that's on the calendar that must now be mourned and studied and recalled for one day. But then, of course, one day comes. Naomi Seidman, writing for the foreword, states that the first modern observance of Tu B'Av occurred in the kibbutzim of Mandate Palestine in 1925, as Jews returned to the land, restored the Hebrew calendar to a living observance which matched the cycle it was designed for, and once again, perhaps most importantly, planted vineyards to dance in. She also points out a fascinating aside of a secular Zionist youth movement for girls in Poland, Banos Agudath Yisrael, who similarly restarted Tu B'Av on their very own the very next year. But unlike their cousins living Ba'aretz, this observance was stripped of its romantic overtures altogether, and instead was a feminist, socialist holiday, a day to celebrate Jewish women and Jewish sisterhood, and the dream of egalitarianism amongst women, dressed alike in white without care for wealth. And her description of these young women is still fully dressed in the language of ambitious, idealistic youth, romantic love language, even if there's no longer a paramour. It is still a love language, the love language, sadly, of a doomed generation, enraptured with a cause that they will never see. If Tu B'Av is the observance then of young, romantic, idealistic love, this love that believes that love alone is all you really need to get through, that love conquers all, then this week's Torah portion, Vayet Hanan, is the love of a more steady and mature and worldly vision. Its words are not foreign to you. We recited them already this morning with the words of Vyahafta. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Vyahafta, then, is love based in covenant. And covenant, of course, is an agreement that we enter into willingly with the knowledge that we are actually in this for the long haul, not just for the burning, bright passion of youth. Several biblical scholars point out that Vyahafta is linguistically remnant of an oath of obedience that a subject might take before a king. Ahava, in this case, might not be read as romantic love at all, but as love that is based in fealty, love that is based in loyalty. You shall be loyal to your God in all ways, in body, mind, and soul. And that is why immediately after this proclamation of love, the Torah continues with the declaration of where shall you put your loyalty? On your arm and on your eye, upon your heart, upon your limb, upon the doorpost of your house, upon your gate. And say it when you get up and say it when you go to sleep. And of course, whenever you go forth. Alternatively, we can read the Vyahafta in its context as part of Moses' grand goodbye speech to the Israelites on the bank of the Jordan River. And here, the plea for loyalty and love are mixed. Yes, be loyal to God, but be loyal out of love. Do not forget all the wonderful things that God has done for you and your ancestors. God has been caring and compassionate, the Redeemer, the Protector, endlessly kind, answering, overturning the greatest empire in the world for your sake. Yes, you should be loyal, but you should also be filled with love. And in the less cited second paragraph of the Vyahafta, the text continues and reminds us that God will continue to shower Israel with blessings as long as we remain in covenantal relationship. Covenantal relationship, then, is the essence of that more seasoned kind of love. A love that acknowledges that we are not in this solely out of attraction, but also because we have done things for each other. We have sacrificed for each other, and we are dedicated to building a better future with each other. As I counsel wedding couples, I often talk to them about how you need to learn to listen and compromise. And that perhaps most importantly, that the vows you make and the words of your ketubah are not vows that you make for your wedding day, but for your marriage as a whole. I also try to remind them that the reason you're getting married today is probably not the reason why you will stay married in the future. In fact, it probably shouldn't be. Your reasons to remain in a loving relationship should only grow over time. Don't just fall in love. Grow in love. Vyahafta, then, is the sort of love that withstands change and withstands the challenge of life. Which brings us to the Haftarah for this week, Shabbat Nachamu. We begin reading the Haftarot of conciliation this week after the 3 weeks, which included those special Haftarot from Jeremiah and culminated in the recitation of Eicha, Lamentations on Tisha B'Av earlier this week. And as mentioned throughout this lead-up, the words of the prophet Jeremiah use an example of a failed marriage due to one partner's repeated unfaithfulness to represent God's anger and disappointment and hurt in the Israelite kingdoms. Israel plays the harlot, while God is the stunned and loyal spouse who has finally just had enough. My teacher, Rabbi Julie Schwartz of HUCJR in Cincinnati, once told us that there is no such thing as a perfectly balanced, equal relationship. No one ever actually achieves the perfect 50-50 split. In all relationships, there will always be one partner that is doing more than the other. But what makes a healthy relationship healthy is 3 separate factors. The first is that the ratio is not terribly far off. Maybe you're at 49-51, maybe you're at 55-45, or maybe you've just found whatever magic number works for you and yours. The second piece, of course, is that the person who is doing more flips and flops between the partners over time. Sometimes work is very demanding for one, and so the other one steps up and goes above and beyond and is doing more for their partner. Sometimes an emergency arises and you might have months, sometimes even years, where the needs of one person are put above. But eventually we acknowledge that there needs to come a time for a swap, that the other person's needs and desires and wants need to be prioritized. That's the second. And the third, and perhaps the most important, is this, that you do not keep score. Because the score cannot be, and will never be, perfectly even. And if you demand that they be even, and when you fail to live up to that goal, you will lead to a relationship built on resentment. And resentment is what kills love. And you can hear all 3 of these standards fail in the words of the prophet Jeremiah. 1, Israel simply does not live up to its end of the bargain. 2, God continuously is doing the heavy lifting and is the only one working to keep the relationship going. And 3, that after years and generations of untold moral failure, God resents Israel. And thus, God is done with the relationship. Which is why this week's Haftarah is such a powerful tonal change. Because as if a switch has been flown, as if a switch has been flipped, as we approach the high holidays, God has already forgiven and is ready to welcome us home, assuming that this time we really do mean to be a loyal partner. We really do mean to be fully invested in this relationship. And that too is love. That is the love that understands that not all promises get to be kept. That is the love that understands that not all relationships are easy. And that is the love that understands that there are moments when every one of us will misstep and hurt someone that we love. And while not every relationship goes through unfaithfulness or cheating, every relationship goes through disappointment. And every relationship goes through hurt. And every relationship goes through that feeling of this is unfair. The love then of Shabbat Nachamu is the love which includes acknowledging an imperfect partner. We are not only the impossible first blush of romance we find on Tu B'Av, nor are we only the upheld covenantal ketubah, endlessly growing in love. We are also partners who try and hurt and fail and then try again. And we love anyways. And we are loved anyways. Idealistic love then, from Tu B'Av. Covenantal love in the Vyahafta. And the love then of Chen, V'Chesed, V'Rachamim. Grace, kindness, and compassion from Shabbat Nachamu. Each of these kinds of love we acknowledge and celebrate today as they come before our eyes. And we are thankful for their existence both in the lives of those we care about, our own personal matters of the heart, and in the life of our people Israel, with its infinite chambers of the heart's duties. I want to close this morning with my favorite Hasidic teaching on the nature of love and the Vyahafta. The master asks, why does the Vyahafta say, place these words upon your heart? Should they not be placed within your heart? What good can words possibly do if they are simply on top of your heart? And he answers his own question saying thus, human beings cannot put things into their own hearts. That's something that only God can do. But there is a time in every human being's life when the heart breaks. And if you have placed those words on top of your heart, then in that moment they will fall in. And when your heart heals, those words of love will still be inside of you. Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Comfort, O be comforted, my people, for this is a Shabbat of love in all its forms. Shabbat Shalom.